I pulled into my driveway after a 16-hour shift that had me chasing speeders up and down Interstate 75 in central Georgia, and all I wanted was a cold beer and my couch. The July heat was still oppressive even at 9 at night, and my truck's air conditioning had decided to give up somewhere around exit 142. What I didn't expect was to find a bright orange tow truck backed up to my Ford F-250, with some guy in an ill-fitting security uniform attaching chains to the undercarriage. "Hey!" I shouted, slamming my door hard enough that the sound echoed through the quiet neighborhood. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The security guard looked up, barely 25 if he was a day, with a patchy beard and a gut that suggested he hadn't seen the inside of a gym in years. His uniform was wrinkled, the patch on his shoulder reading Meadowbrook Security Services in faded gold letters. "This vehicle is in violation of HOA regulations, sir. It's being towed." I walked closer, my badge still clipped to my belt under my plain clothes shirt. "Violation? I live here." "That's my truck, parked in my driveway." "HOA says commercial vehicles aren't allowed," he said, not even bothering to look at me as he continued securing the chains. "This is clearly a commercial truck. My F-250 was personal. I had bought it 3 years ago, paid cash, and it had never been used for anything commercial in its life. Sure, it was big, but it was a regular pickup truck that thousands of people in Georgia drove. "It's not a commercial vehicle. It's my personal truck." "Says you," the kid muttered. "I got my orders from Mrs. Patterson. She runs the HOA around here, and what she says goes." Mrs. Patterson. I had heard that name exactly twice since moving into this subdivision 6 months ago. Once when I received a passive-aggressive note about my grass being a 1/4 inch too tall, and once when my neighbor Greg mentioned her in the same tone people use when discussing root canals. I had successfully avoided her until now, apparently. "Call her," I said, crossing my arms. "Tell her to come down here and explain this to me herself." The security guard finally stopped what he was doing and pulled out his phone. He dialed, waited, then spoke in a tone that suggested he was used to taking orders. "Yeah, Mrs. Patterson, the homeowner is here. He's not happy about the tow." A pause. "Okay, yeah, I'll tell him." He hung up and looked at me with what might have been sympathy. "She'll be here in 5 minutes." I leaned against my truck, feeling the heat radiating off the metal. My street was lined with modest houses, each with small front yards and driveways that barely fit 2 cars. The subdivision, Meadowbrook Estates, had been built in the early 2000s, and it showed. The houses were cookie-cutter designs with vinyl siding and builder-grade everything. I had bought mine because it was affordable and close to the State Patrol headquarters in Macon. True to her word, headlights appeared at the end of the street exactly 5 minutes later. A white Lexus SUV pulled up to the curb, and out stepped a woman in her mid-50s with blonde hair that had been teased and sprayed into submission. She wore a floral blouse and white capri pants, and her expression suggested she had just smelled something unpleasant. "Mr. Ingram," she said, not bothering with pleasantries, "your truck is in violation of our community standards." "Adam Ingram," I corrected, "and I'd love to hear which standard that would be." She pulled out a folder from her oversized purse, the kind that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association Covenant. No commercial vehicles are permitted to be parked in driveways or streets within the community. She read it like a prosecutor delivering a closing argument. "That's a personal vehicle," I said slowly, wondering if I was going to have to spell this out. "I drive it to work. I drive it to the store." "It's not commercial. It's a 3/4 ton pickup truck," she countered. Those are used by contractors and businesses. Therefore, it's commercial. The security guard was standing by the tow truck, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation but not willing to contradict his employer. The tow truck driver, an older guy with grease stains on his shirt, was lighting a cigarette and watching like this was his evening entertainment. "Mrs. Patterson, is it?" I asked, keeping my voice level. By that logic, anyone with a pickup truck would be in violation. "I see at least 3 other trucks on this street right now." "Those are half-ton trucks," she said primly. "Completely different. Your truck is clearly oversized and brings down the aesthetic of our neighborhood." I had dealt with difficult people before. In my line of work, you encountered everything from belligerent drunks to entitled speeders who thought their daddy's lawyer would get them out of anything. But there was something about HOA tyrants that was a special kind of irritating. They had just enough power to make lives miserable but not enough oversight to keep them in check. "I'm not letting you tow my truck," I said firmly. "It's legally parked on my property and it's not a commercial vehicle. If you have a problem with it, we can take it up through proper channels." "The proper channels are me," Mrs. Patterson said, her voice rising. "I am the president of this HOA and I have the authority to enforce our rules. Dale, continue with the tow." The security guard, Dale, looked between us nervously. "Madam, if he's saying it's not commercial—" "I don't pay you to think," she snapped. "I pay you to follow orders. Now tow that truck, or I'll find someone who will." I reached under my shirt and pulled out my badge, holding it up so both Dale and Mrs. Patterson could see it clearly. "Adam Ingram, Georgia State Patrol. What you're attempting to do right now is theft. My vehicle is legally registered, insured, and parked on private property that I own. If you proceed with this tow, I will arrest both of you." Dale's face went pale, and he immediately started unhooking the chains from my truck. The tow truck driver flicked his cigarette into the street and climbed back into his cab, clearly wanting no part of what was about to happen. Mrs. Patterson, however, didn't back down. Her face flushed red and she clutched her folder like it was a shield. "You can't threaten me. I have every right to enforce HOA rules. Your occupation doesn't give you special privileges." "You're right," I said, clipping my badge back to my belt. "My occupation doesn't give me special privileges. But it does mean I know the law, and what you're doing right now is illegal. You can't tow a legally parked vehicle from private property without proper notification and cause. I've received no notification and you have no cause." "The HOA covenant is legally binding," she insisted. "You signed it when you purchased your home." "I'd love to see where I signed anything about truck sizes," I said, "because I read that covenant before I closed on this house, and there was nothing about 3/4-ton versus half-ton trucks. Just a vague statement about commercial vehicles, which mine is not." Dale had finished unhooking the chains and was practically running back to his beat-up sedan, parked behind the tow truck. The tow truck driver gave a half-hearted wave and drove off, leaving Mrs. Patterson standing alone in the street, her folder trembling in her hands. "This isn't over," she said, her voice tight. "I will be contacting our HOA attorney about this matter, and you can expect to hear from them." "Looking forward to it," I said. "In the meantime, stay off my property and away from my truck. If I catch anyone near it again without my permission, I'll file charges." She turned on her heel and marched back to her Lexus, slamming the door hard enough that I was surprised the window didn't crack. She peeled out, her tires squealing on the asphalt, and disappeared down the street. I stood in my driveway for a long moment, the adrenaline from the confrontation slowly fading. My next-door neighbor, Greg Martinez, emerged from his front door, a beer in hand and a grin on his face. "That was better than anything on TV," he called out. Deborah Patterson finally met her match. I walked over to the property line between our yards. Greg was in his 40s, worked as an accountant, and had lived in Meadowbrook Estates for over a decade. He had warned me about the HOA when I first moved in, but I had brushed it off, figuring I could handle whatever suburban politics came my way. "She try this kind of thing often?" I asked. "Constantly," Greg said, taking a sip of his beer. "Last year, she tried to find the Johnsons 3 houses down because their mailbox was the wrong shade of black. The year before that, she had someone's vegetable garden ripped out because it violated the landscaping rules. She's on a power trip, and most people just pay the fines or comply because it's easier than fighting." "Well, she picked the wrong person to mess with," I said. "I'm not paying a dime and she's not touching my truck." "Good for you, man," Greg said. "Seriously, someone needs to stand up to her. The problem is, she actually does have some legal backing. The HOA covenant is real, and she's weaponized every vague clause in it to make people's lives miserable." I thought about that as I finally made it inside my house. The AC was running, thank God, and I grabbed that beer I'd been dreaming about for the last hour. My house was small, just 3 bedrooms and 2 baths, but it was mine. I had worked hard to get here, putting in years on the force, building my reputation, earning my place as a state trooper. I wasn't about to let some power-hungry HOA president push me around. The next morning, I was off duty, which meant I actually had time to deal with this mess. I made coffee, strong and black, and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA covenant was filed with the county, and I pulled up a copy to read through it carefully. Section 7, Paragraph 3 did indeed mention commercial vehicles. But the definition was vague, stating only that vehicles used primarily for commercial purposes were prohibited. My truck was registered as a personal vehicle. I didn't have any business logos on it. I didn't use it for work beyond driving to and from the station. By any reasonable interpretation, it wasn't commercial, but Mrs. Patterson wasn't operating on reasonable interpretations. She was operating on control. I called the HOA management company listed on the documents, a place called Southern Property Services based out of Macon. After navigating through an automated phone system that seemed designed to make people give up, I finally reached a human. "Southern Property Services, this is Jennifer speaking. How can I help you?" "Hi, Jennifer. My name is Adam Ingram. I'm a homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates, and I need to file a complaint about HOA overreach." There was a pause, then the sound of typing. "Okay, Mr. Ingram. Can you describe the situation?" I explained the previous night's events, keeping my tone professional. Jennifer listened, occasionally making sympathetic noises, and when I finished, she sighed. "Unfortunately, Mr. Ingram, this isn't the first complaint we've received about Mrs. Patterson. However, as the elected HOA president, she does have authority to interpret and enforce the covenant as she sees fit. Even when her interpretation is unreasonable, the HOA board would need to vote to override her decisions," Jennifer said. "Have you considered attending the next board meeting? They're held monthly, first Tuesday of every month at 7 p.m. at the community center." I wrote that down. Today was July 15th, which meant the next meeting was over 2 weeks away. And in the meantime, try to work it out with Mrs. Patterson directly, Jennifer suggested, though her tone indicated she knew that was unlikely to help. "If she issues any fines, you have the right to appeal them to the full board." After hanging up, I felt only marginally better informed. The system was designed to favor whoever had the most time and energy to dedicate to bureaucratic nonsense, and Mrs. Patterson clearly had both in spades. I decided to take a different approach. I drove to the county courthouse in Macon, a stately building with white columns that had been standing since the 1920s. Inside, I found the property records office and requested copies of all HOA-related documents filed for Meadowbrook Estates. The clerk, an older woman with reading glasses on a chain, gave me a curious look. "You having trouble with your HOA, honey?" "You could say that," I said. "Seems to be going around," she said, shaking her head. "I've had 3 people this month pulling the same records. Y'all must have quite the situation over there." She printed out everything, a stack of papers about 2 inches thick, and charged me $15 for the copies. I took them to a coffee shop downtown and started reading. What I found was enlightening. The original HOA covenant, filed when the subdivision was first developed in 2003, was actually fairly reasonable. Basic rules about maintaining properties, noise restrictions, that sort of thing. But over the years, amendments had been added. Most of them were filed between 2018 and the present, and most of them were increasingly restrictive. No vehicles parked on the street overnight. No decorations except during approved holiday periods. No play equipment in front yards. No vegetable gardens visible from the street. No clotheslines. No basketball hoops. No solar panels without board approval. The list went on, and every single amendment had been filed by Deborah Patterson. I cross-referenced with the board meeting minutes, which were also part of the public record. Attendance at meetings was dismal, usually just Mrs. Patterson and 1 or 2 other board members out of the required 5. Most votes passed unanimously, simply because no one else showed up to object. This was how petty tyrants operated. They counted on apathy, on people being too busy or too tired to fight back. And for years, it had worked. My phone rang, interrupting my reading. It was my captain, Marcus Reynolds. "Ingram, you working today?" "Negative, sir. I'm off until Thursday." "Good. Just wanted to make sure. We've got that multi-county drug task force meeting tomorrow, and I need you sharp for it." "I'll be there," I promised. "Everything good otherwise?" he asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice. Captain Reynolds had been my mentor since I joined the State Patrol 7 years ago, and he knew me well enough to pick up when something was bothering me. "Just some HOA drama," I said. "Nothing I can't handle." "HOA," he muttered. "I rent for a reason, Adam. Those things are nothing but trouble." After we hung up, I continued reading through the documents. I found something interesting buried in the bylaws. Any homeowner could call for a special election to remove a board member with a petition signed by 20% of the homeowners. Meadowbrook Estates had 140 homes, which meant I needed 28 signatures. It was a long shot, but it was something. I spent the rest of the day drafting a petition and printing out copies. That evening, I started walking the neighborhood, knocking on doors. Most people were home from work, and most were surprised to see me. My first stop was Greg's house. He signed immediately. "About time someone did something," he said. "Count me in for whatever you need." The next house, the Johnsons, were the ones whose mailbox had been an issue. They signed eagerly, Mrs. Johnson practically crying with relief that someone was finally standing up to Deborah Patterson. By the time darkness fell, I had 15 signatures. Not bad for a few hours of work. People were scared of retaliation, that much was clear. Several homeowners expressed support but wouldn't sign, worried about becoming targets. I understood, even if I found it frustrating. Over the next few days, between shifts at work, I continued gathering signatures. I made sure to document everything, taking photos of each signed petition page, keeping copies. If Mrs. Patterson wanted to play hardball, I'd show her what a real investigation looked like. On the 5th day after the towing incident, I found a letter in my mailbox. It was from the HOA, written on official letterhead, and it was a formal notice of violation. My truck was listed as a commercial vehicle, and I was being fined $200 for the first violation. If the truck was not removed within 7 days, the fine would increase to $500, and the HOA would pursue legal action. I took a photo of the letter and added it to my growing file of documentation. Then I drafted a response, citing Georgia property law and the actual definition of commercial vehicles according to the Department of Motor Vehicles. My truck was registered as a personal vehicle, weighing 7,800 pounds, with a standard license plate. Nothing about it was commercial except Mrs. Patterson's imagination. I submitted my response through the HOA portal online and in writing via certified mail. I wanted a paper trail that would hold up in court if it came to that. The 7th day arrived, and my truck was still in my driveway. I was working a day shift, so I set up a motion-activated camera facing my driveway, just in case Mrs. Patterson tried anything while I was gone. Sure enough, when I checked the footage during my lunch break, I saw her white Lexus drive slowly past my house 3 times. She didn't stop, but the message was clear. She was watching. That evening, I attended a gathering at Greg's house. He had invited several neighbors, all people who had signed my petition, and we talked strategy. In the living room were Greg, the Johnsons, a retired teacher named Helen Kowalski, a young couple named Brad and Amy Sullivan, and a city firefighter named Marcus Green who lived 2 streets over. The problem is, even if we get enough signatures to force an election, she'll fight it, Helen said. She was in her 70s, sharp as a tack, and had taught high school English for 40 years. Deborah doesn't give up power easily. We have to try, Amy Sullivan said. She sent us a violation notice because our son's swing set was visible from the street. She wanted us to move it to the backyard, but our backyard is on a slope. It's not safe. She fined me for having my garbage cans out 3 hours too long, Marcus Green added. 3 hours. I was working a double shift at the fire station and couldn't get home in time. $50 fine. The stories kept coming, each one more petty than the last. Mrs. Patterson had created an environment of fear and frustration, and people were fed up. By the end of the evening, I had 29 signatures. We had crossed the threshold. The next morning, I submitted the petition to Southern Property Services, along with a formal request for a special election to recall Deborah Patterson as HOA president. Jennifer, the woman I had spoken to earlier, called me back within an hour. Mr. Ingram, I have to say, in 10 years of working with HOAs, I've never seen anyone actually pull this off. You have more than enough signatures. What happens now? I asked. We're required to schedule a special meeting within 30 days. All homeowners will be notified by mail and email. Mrs. Patterson will be given an opportunity to defend her position, and then there will be a vote. A simple majority of attending homeowners is required to recall her. And if she's recalled, the board would hold a new election for president. In the meantime, the vice president would assume her duties. I thanked Jennifer and hung up, feeling a cautious sense of optimism. This was going to get ugly before it got better, but at least we were making progress. Mrs. Patterson's response came faster than I expected. That same afternoon, a man in a suit showed up at my door. He introduced himself as Richard Thornberry, attorney for the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. Mr. Ingram, I'm here to discuss the violation notice you received. I already responded to that in writing, I said, not inviting him in. Yes, I've seen your response. However, my client maintains that your vehicle is in violation of the covenant, and she's prepared to take legal action if necessary. Then I'll see you in court, I said, and I'll countersue for harassment and abuse of authority. Thornberry adjusted his glasses, clearly not used to homeowners who fought back. Mr. Ingram, litigation is expensive and time-consuming for everyone involved. Perhaps we can reach a compromise. What kind of compromise? You could park your truck in your garage out of sight. That would satisfy the aesthetic concerns while allowing you to keep the vehicle. My garage is full of my actual belongings, I said. And even if it wasn't, I shouldn't have to hide my personal vehicle because your client has a power complex. That's not a productive attitude, Mr. Ingram. Neither is trying to tow someone's truck in the middle of the night, I countered. Tell Mrs. Patterson that if she comes near my property again, I'll file for a restraining order. And if she wants to take this to court, I'll bring every instance of her abusing her authority as evidence of a pattern of harassment. Thornberry left without another word, and I immediately called my own attorney, a guy named Paul Henderson, who I had used when buying the house. Paul specialized in real estate law, which included HOA disputes. Adam, good to hear from you. What's going on? I explained everything, from the attempted towing to the petition to Thornberry's visit. Paul listened carefully, asking questions here and there. You've got a strong case, he said when I finished. HOA covenants can be enforced, but they have to be reasonable and applied consistently. From what you're telling me, Mrs. Patterson is doing neither. If she takes you to court, I'll represent you, and honestly, I think we'd win. What about the recall election? That's tricky. It's allowed under Georgia law and your HOA bylaws, but she can challenge the validity of the signatures or the process. I'd recommend having all your documentation in order. Photos of every signed petition, records of when and how they were submitted, everything. Already done, I said. Paul laughed. Of course you have. Cop instincts, that'll serve you well here. Keep me posted and let me know if Thornberry contacts you again. The notice for the special meeting went out a week later. It was scheduled for August 10th at 7 p.m. to be held at the Meadowbrook Estates Community Center. The agenda was simple. Recall vote for HOA President Deborah Patterson, discussion and vote. The day of the meeting, I made sure to arrive early. The community center was a small building near the entrance of the subdivision, with a meeting room that could hold maybe 75 people if they squeezed in. I expected a decent turnout, but what I found shocked me. By 6:45, the room was completely packed. Every chair was taken, and people were standing along the walls. I recognized many faces from my petition drive, but there were plenty I didn't know. Greg had saved me a seat near the front, and I squeezed through the crowd to join him. Looks like the whole neighborhood showed up, he whispered. Mrs. Patterson arrived at exactly 7, flanked by Richard Thornberry and another woman I didn't recognize. She looked composed, even confident as she took her seat at the table in the front of the room. Jennifer from Southern Property Services was there to moderate, and she looked distinctly uncomfortable with the size of the crowd. "Good evening, everyone," Jennifer began, her voice barely audible over the murmur of conversation. "We're here tonight for a special meeting called by petition of the homeowners regarding the recall of HOA President Deborah Patterson. Per the bylaws, we'll begin with a statement from Mrs. Patterson, followed by comments from the petitioners, and then we'll open the floor for discussion before taking a vote." Mrs. Patterson stood, smoothing her blouse. She had dressed for battle in a navy pantsuit that probably cost more than most people's monthly salaries. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice strong. "I want to start by saying that everything I've done as your HOA president has been in service of maintaining the property values and quality of life in our community. The rules I enforce aren't my personal preferences. They're the covenants that we all agreed to when we purchased our homes. Someone in the back muttered something unflattering, but Mrs. Patterson ignored it. Mr. Ingram has chosen to challenge my authority because he doesn't want to follow the same rules as everyone else. His truck is oversized and inappropriate for a residential neighborhood. But this isn't really about a truck. It's about whether we, as a community, value order and standards, or whether we allow chaos and decline. She sat down to scattered, half-hearted applause from a few people I assumed were her allies. Jennifer looked at me. "Mr. Ingram, as the primary petitioner, would you like to respond?" I stood, feeling every eye in the room on me. Public speaking wasn't my favorite thing, but I had testified in court enough times to know how to present a clear argument. "Thank you. I want to address Mrs. Patterson's claim that this is about one truck. It's not. It's about a pattern of abuse of authority that's been going on for years. I've spoken to dozens of homeowners in the past few weeks, and the stories I've heard are disturbing. Fines for mailboxes being the wrong shade of black, threats over children's play equipment, harassment over garbage cans being out a few hours too long. Mrs. Patterson has used her position to bully and intimidate people, and it needs to stop." There were nods and murmurs of agreement throughout the room. My truck is a personal vehicle, legally registered and parked on my own property. The attempt to tow it was illegal, and Mrs. Patterson knows it. But beyond that, the way she runs this HOA violates the spirit of community. We should be working together to make this a good place to live, not living in fear of petty fines and arbitrary rules. I sat down to actual applause, which felt validating but also surreal. This whole situation was surreal. Jennifer opened the floor for comments, and hands shot up throughout the room. For the next hour, homeowner after homeowner stood up to share their experiences with the HOA under Mrs. Patterson's leadership. Some stories were almost comical in their petness. One man had been fined because his lawn furniture was beige instead of the approved earth tones. A woman had been threatened with legal action because she planted roses in her front yard without board approval. But some stories were genuinely upsetting. An elderly couple had nearly lost their home to foreclosure because Mrs. Patterson had stacked fines on them faster than they could pay on their fixed income. A single mother had been harassed for having a car with a cracked windshield parked in her driveway while she saved up for repairs. Through it all, Mrs. Patterson sat stone-faced, occasionally whispering to her attorney. When the comments finally ended, Jennifer called for a vote. All homeowners present are eligible to vote. This requires a simple majority to pass. All in favor of recalling Deborah Patterson as HOA president, please raise your hand. The room erupted with raised hands. I didn't even need to count to know we had won. Jennifer did count carefully and then asked for those opposed. Maybe 10 hands went up. "The motion passes," Jennifer announced. "Deborah Patterson is hereby recalled as HOA president. Per the bylaws, Vice President David Chen will assume the role of acting president until a new election can be held." Mrs. Patterson stood abruptly, her face flushed with anger. "This is a sham. Those signatures were improperly obtained, and I'll be challenging this in court." "That's your right," Jennifer said calmly. "But as of now, you no longer have authority to act on behalf of the HOA." Mrs. Patterson grabbed her purse and stormed out, Thornberry hurrying after her. The room burst into applause and conversation, people celebrating like they had just won independence from a tyrant. Which, in a way, they had. David Chen, the vice president, was a quiet accountant in his 60s who had been on the board for years, but had always been overshadowed by Mrs. Patterson. He looked shell-shocked as people congratulated him. "I never wanted to be president," he said to me quietly, But I promise I'll do better than she did. That shouldn't be hard. Over the next few days, things slowly returned to normal. David Chen sent out an email to all homeowners announcing that the HOA would be reviewing all outstanding fines and violations to ensure they were reasonable and properly documented. Several were dismissed outright, including mine, but Mrs. Patterson wasn't done. A week after the recall, I received notice that she was suing me personally for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress. The claim was absurd, but it would still require time and money to fight. Paul Henderson wasn't worried. It's a slap suit. Strategic lawsuit against public participation. She's trying to intimidate you into backing down. Georgia has anti-slap provisions. We'll file a motion to dismiss, and she'll probably end up owing you attorney's fees. He was right. The judge dismissed her lawsuit within 30 days and ordered Mrs. Patterson to pay my legal fees, which came to about $3,000. But that wasn't the end of her troubles. During the discovery process for her lawsuit, Paul had subpoenaed HOA financial records. What he found raised serious questions. Mrs. Patterson had been charging personal expenses to the HOA credit card, including dinners, shopping trips, and even a weekend at a resort in Savannah. The amounts weren't huge, maybe $8,000 over 2 years, but it was still theft. I turned the information over to the local district attorney's office. As a state trooper, I couldn't directly handle the investigation, but I could make sure the right people knew about it. The DA, a sharp woman named Lisa Brennan, was interested. HOA fraud is more common than people think, she told me when we met at her office. Usually the amounts are small enough that it's handled civilly. But $8,000 crosses the threshold into criminal territory. I'll open an investigation. 3 months later, in November, Deborah Patterson was arrested and charged with theft by conversion and fraud. The local news covered it, and the story spread through Macon like wildfire. The woman who had terrorized an entire subdivision for years was finally facing consequences. The case didn't go to trial. Mrs. Patterson's attorney negotiated a plea deal. She pled guilty to misdemeanor theft, was ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, plus additional fines, and was sentenced to 2 years of probation and 100 hours of community service. She was also permanently banned from serving on any HOA board in Georgia. The new HOA board, elected in a proper vote that fall, was a diverse group of homeowners who actually cared about the community. They immediately set about rolling back the most draconian rules, simplifying the covenant to focus on actual issues like property maintenance and noise, rather than micromanaging every detail of people's lives. My truck remained in my driveway where it belonged. No one ever bothered it again. One evening in early December, I was sitting on my front porch, enjoying the rare coolness of a Georgia winter, when Greg walked over with a 6-pack of beer. "Figured we should celebrate," he said, handing me a bottle. "1 year ago you moved in and thought this was going to be a quiet neighborhood," I laughed. "I was so wrong." "You did good, man," Greg said, settling into the chair next to mine. "Seriously, you could have just paid the fine, moved your truck, kept your head down, but you didn't. You fought back and you changed things for everyone." "I just didn't like being pushed around," I said. "And I had the training and resources to fight back. A lot of people don't." "That's exactly why it mattered," Greg said. "You used your position for good. That's what we need more of." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the neighborhood. Kids were riding bikes in the fading light. Someone was grilling, the smell of burgers drifting through the air. It felt like a real community, not a prison camp run by a petty dictator. My phone buzzed with a text from Captain Reynolds. "Heard about the HOA situation. Proud of you, Ingram. Drinks on me next time. I smiled and pocketed my phone. The whole experience had been exhausting, frustrating, and at times infuriating, but it had also been worth it. Standing up to bullies, whether they wore a badge or an HOA president title, was part of who I was. It was why I became a state trooper in the first place. The holidays came and went. Meadowbrook Estates transformed, not physically but in spirit. People put up decorations without fear of fines. Kids played in front yards without parents worrying about violation notices. The neighborhood association became what it was supposed to be, a group of neighbors working together to maintain their community, not a tool of oppression. In January, I got a call from Jennifer at Southern Property Services. "Adam, I wanted to thank you. Since what happened in Meadowbrook, we've had 3 other communities petition to recall their board presidents. You started a movement." "I just wanted to park my truck in peace," I said, but I was smiling. "Well, you did more than that. You reminded people that they have power, even against systems that seem untouchable." After we hung up, I thought about that. It was true in a way. The HOA had seemed untouchable because people felt isolated and powerless. But when we came together, when we stood up collectively, the bully backed down. It was a lesson I had learned in my work as a trooper, but it applied just as much to everyday life. In February, the new HOA board hosted a community barbecue at the community center. It was a warm Saturday afternoon, and nearly every household sent someone. Tables were set up with food. Kids ran around playing, and people actually talked to each other like neighbors instead of strangers who happened to live near each other. David Chen, still serving as president, gave a short speech. "I want to thank everyone for being patient as we rebuild this community. We've made a lot of changes, but the most important one is remembering that we're all in this together. No one person should have unchecked power, and everyone deserves to be treated with respect and fairness." There was applause, genuine and warm. I stood in the back, watching, and felt a sense of satisfaction that I rarely experienced. This was what community was supposed to look like. Later that evening, as I was cleaning up, a young woman approached me. I recognized her as one of the homeowners who had signed my petition, but hadn't spoken at the meeting. "Mr. Ingram, I just wanted to say thank you. I was too scared to stand up to Mrs. Patterson, but you weren't. You saved my family from losing our home. We were drowning in fines we couldn't afford. I'm glad I could help," I said. "But you should know you had more power than you realized. We all did. We just needed to use it." She nodded, tears in her eyes, and walked away. I felt the weight of what had happened settle on me in a new way. This wasn't just about my truck. It was about dozens of families who had been suffering in silence, afraid to speak up. By taking a stand, I had given them a voice. The weeks turned into months, and life in Meadowbrook Estates settled into a new normal. The HOA still existed, still had rules, but they were reasonable and enforced fairly. Property values actually went up, not because of draconian aesthetic standards, but because people took pride in a community where they felt respected. I continued my work with the State Patrol, chasing speeders and investigating accidents on Georgia's highways. But the HOA situation had changed me in subtle ways. I was more aware of how power could be abused, even in small ways. I was more determined to stand up for people who couldn't stand up for themselves. One day in late March, I was at the station when Captain Reynolds called me into his office. "Adam, sit down. I want to talk to you about something." I sat, wondering if I was in trouble. Reynolds had a poker face that was impossible to read. "I've been watching how you handled that HOA situation," he said. "The way you built a coalition, gathered evidence, navigated the legal system, that takes skill and leadership. Thank you, sir. I'm recommending you for a promotion." We've got an opening for a sergeant position in the Criminal Investigation Division. It's more complex cases, more responsibility, but I think you're ready for it." I was stunned. I had been happy as a road trooper, but the opportunity to move up, to take on more challenging work, was appealing. "I'd be honored, sir." "Good. The paperwork will take a few weeks, but expect to start training in May." As I left his office, I realized how much my life had changed in less than a year. I had moved into what I thought would be a quiet subdivision, only to end up in a battle against a corrupt HOA president. That battle had taught me things about leadership, community, and standing up for what's right that I never would have learned otherwise. Back in Meadowbrook Estates, spring brought new life to the neighborhood. People planted gardens without fear of violation notices. Kids drew chalk art on driveways. Someone organized a community yard sale that raised money for the local elementary school. And my truck sat in my driveway, exactly where it belonged, a symbol of the fight we had won and the community we had reclaimed. One evening in April, I was washing my truck when Mrs. Johnson from down the street walked by with her dog. We chatted briefly about the weather, the neighborhood, nothing important, but as she walked away, she turned back. "Adam, I know I've said this before, but thank you, really. You gave us our neighborhood back." "We all did it together," I said, "maybe, but you were the one brave enough to start." After she left, I finished washing the truck, thinking about bravery. I had never considered standing up to an HOA president as brave. I had just been annoyed and unwilling to back down, but maybe that was what bravery was sometimes. Not grand gestures or heroic acts, but simply refusing to accept injustice, even when it would be easier to comply. The summer came, hot and humid as Georgia summers always were. The neighborhood thrived. The pool that had been closed for repairs due to mismanaged HOA funds was reopened. The playground equipment was updated. Small improvements that made a big difference in quality of life. In July, almost exactly a year after the towing incident, the HOA held its annual meeting. Attendance was high, people engaged and interested in the community. David Chen gave a report on finances, which were healthy and transparent. Elections were held for board positions, and several good people stepped up to serve. I didn't run for the board. I had done my part, and I was happy to let others take the lead. But I attended every meeting, asked questions, kept them honest. Once you've seen how badly things can go wrong, you don't take good governance for granted. That night, after the meeting, I drove home through the neighborhood, taking the long way, looking at the houses and yards and people. This place had tested me in ways I hadn't expected. It had forced me to be not just a cop, but a citizen, a neighbor, a member of a community, and I had risen to that challenge. We all had. As I pulled into my driveway, I looked at my house, my truck, my slice of suburban Georgia. It wasn't perfect. No place ever is. But it was mine, and it was part of a community that had learned to stand together against those who would abuse power. The lights were on in Greg's house. The Johnsons were sitting on their porch. Someone a few houses down was playing music, not too loud, just background noise to a warm summer evening. This was home. Not just a house, but a real community. And that was worth fighting for. I grabbed my bag from the truck and headed inside, already thinking about what tomorrow would bring. More work with the state patrol, probably. More challenges and problems to solve. But also more moments like this, where I could appreciate what we had built, what we had protected, what we had saved from someone who saw neighbors as subjects to rule rather than people to serve. The story of Deborah Patterson and the Meadowbrook Estates HOA became something of a legend in Macon. Other neighborhoods reached out, asking for advice on how to handle their own problem boards. I became an unofficial consultant, helping people understand their rights and organize their communities. It wasn't what I had expected when I moved into a modest house in a quiet subdivision, but it was what I got, and in the end, I was grateful for it. The experience had made me a better trooper, a better neighbor, and a better person. And my truck still sat in my driveway, unmolested, a daily reminder that sometimes the biggest battles aren't fought on highways or in courtrooms, but in the ordinary places where people live their lives. And those battles, when fought for the right reasons and with the courage to see them through, can change everything. The moon rose over Meadowbrook Estates, casting long shadows across lawns that were just the right length because their owners wanted them that way, not because some petty tyrant demanded it. Children's laughter echoed from backyards. Dogs barked in friendly greeting. People lived their lives in peace. And that, I realized as I finally settled onto my couch with that beer I had been thinking about a year ago, was the whole point. Not perfection, not rigid control, not power for its own sake. Just ordinary people, living ordinary lives in a community that respected them. It had taken a fight to get here. It had required courage, persistence, and a willingness to stand up when it would have been easier to back down. But we had won. Not just me, but everyone who had signed that petition, everyone who had attended that meeting, everyone who had refused to accept that this was just the way things had to be. As I drifted off to sleep that night, I thought about all the Deborah Pattersons in the world, people who found a little bit of power and used it to make others miserable. And I thought about all the people who suffered under them in silence, believing they had no choice. But there's always a choice. It might not be easy, it might require sacrifice and struggle, but it's there, waiting for someone brave enough to take it. I had taken it. We had taken it. And Meadowbrook Estates was better for it. The fight was over. The community was healed. Justice had been served. And my truck remained exactly where it belonged, in my driveway, under the Georgia stars. A testament to the simple truth that sometimes standing your ground is the most important thing you can do.